Well, thank you very much, Joe. With all that promotion, I don't see how I can possibly come up to the billing. But let me say that I very much enjoyed last night my good friend Dr. Edmund Storm's talk, as I have many of the other talks at this wonderful symposium, which I'm sure will be very influential. The last one that I was at last year was extremely influential, not only to my own perception of how the field is evolving, but also to our magazine. We covered the Correas very extensively in infinite energy, and I think that was a very important turning point for us. In the proceedings of the conference, you'll see what I was intending to do as a speech, how we won the cold fusion war, which in the context of what Ed spoke of last night, you might get the impression, gee, how could we be winning the cold fusion war when everyone thinks we're insane? And the New York Times has not anointed us yet, and so forth. Well, I'll make a case that we are winning the cold fusion war, but I'm not going to just repeat that speech. I'm just going to do my usual random walk through cold fusion and new energy. Let's begin by honoring our heroes. Get them right side up, I guess. Dr. Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann. This is where it all began. It certainly changed my life. March 23rd, 1989 was a very unexpected day. I thought my initial reaction upon hearing the story from some other people at MIT was, gee, those journalists have gotten it wrong again. You couldn't possibly be claiming fusion in a jar, could you? And yet when I got home and I watched MacNeil-Lehrer that night, I said, gee, they're really serious about this. They really think they've done it. So I have to say, I was very skeptical, but I was very, very privileged to be at MIT at the time and see both sides, see this whole story evolve. You know, it was great that we gave them the prize that we did last night, or the organization did. I had a thought last night. Here's Julian Schwinger, also a very good friend of mine, may he rest in peace. Perhaps we should call this, with the permission perhaps of his wife, we should call the prize the Schwinger Prize. Maybe that should happen. I don't know. But just a thought. Now, the whole cold fusion story can only be seen properly in the context of this gargantuan battle for energy from the ocean. That's what hot fusion was all about. They thought that they were going to imitate the sun. That's what their paradigm was, and that's why, as Ed pointed out, they had a very great difficulty in comprehending this new paradigm. They actually forgot what they were trying to do. Their objective in life was and is and should be, how can we make the oceans of the world infinite fuel tanks? But they forgot that. They said, our mission in life is to make the tokamak work, to imitate the sun. And likewise, we're now going off, getting ready to spend some additional billions of dollars on laser systems, the National Ignition Facility, which will be another, in my opinion, waste of money. They still haven't gotten the message that cold fusion is real. They're still spending money. But I must say, this tokamak here, I can proudly say, is now defunct. We'll have to pay to clean it up. It expired a few weeks ago. They pulled the plug and so forth. Yes, hot fusion is the energy of the future and always will be. It's always 20 years away. Just give us some more money and we'll do the job. In fact, I was on National Public Radio with one of the excellent journalists who've helped us win the cold fusion war, not because they're in cahoots with us. They just saw the evidence that we gave them. Ira Flato on National Public Radio. He had a hot fusion man on who was on the DOE ERAB panel that killed cold fusion funding in the United States. This man has a new book called The Fusion Quest. And he was there again for a half hour on National Public Radio promoting hot fusion and give us more money and we'll give you a reactor maybe in the year 2050. And then Ira had me on giving all the cold fusion evidence and activities and commercial things that were going on. And he asked Dr. Fowler, T. Kenneth Fowler, UC Berkeley, I think, or Livermore, or someplace out there on the edge of the world. He said, what do you think of all this? And the guy he had no comment. He said, no comment. But actually the tone in which he said it was, these people in cold fusion are so beneath us, we don't even need to respond to them. Because that's exactly what he said in his book. He said, listen, I haven't been following cold fusion at all, but my impression, he said, is that it is still an illusion. So here's a man that we paid to be on a committee in 1989. He's not following the story, but he can get on into his book and on national radio and basically say there's nothing to it. That's what we're faced with. But even as we encounter such statements, we are winning the war. And I'll go into more detail as to how we are winning the war. First, let me give you the overall conclusion, which we put on this third edition of the magazine. It's only 2 years old now. 50 years after the birth of the nuclear age, a new source of energy has been discovered. My friends, it's absolutely irrefutable. Of all the claims of overunity, in my opinion, so far, this is the very best and most widely confirmed one. Not to say that the others aren't real. In fact, I think there's virtually no chance that the Korea device is a mistake. But this cold fusion and its variants is absolutely correct. We can't fully explain it, as Ed pointed out. Many reject it, but it exists, and it will end the world that we know, period. It can't be any other way. There are just too many people now doing this. At one time, it might have been explained away as a mistake, pathological science. Okay? Another explanation might have been that it was some kind of unknown chemical or phenomenon or mechanical storage in the palladium. But that doesn't work, because we're talking now hundreds of millions of joules of energy coming out of a little piece of metal and some water. And that's not consistent with chemistry. It doesn't work. So it's neither of these, even though the chief of the panel that deep sixed cold fusion funding is going around giving lectures in the country, cold fusion, the scientific fiasco of the century. I know Ed Storms and many other people feel this has got to be the explanation. There certainly are nuclear reactions going on, and there's a sort of a paradigm within cold fusion which is very hard to break. And I don't have any objective in breaking it because, frankly, it might be true. This might be true, that the nuclear reactions can be, when we fully understand how they're occurring and in what amount they're occurring, the excess power will be commensurate in an E equals mc square sense with the excess heat. But it could be something else. It could be mediated by zero-point energy. It could be partially due to Mill's theory of the shrinking hydrogen atom electron cloud. Who knows? But all we know is that it's not pathological science and it's not ordinary chemistry. Well, in the beginning there was this whole quandary, because these were the classes of evidence. We had the possibility there was nothing there. We had some claims that there was just, from Steve Jones in Brigham Young University, there was just low-level nuclear products. Some people said, no, it's just the heat only, and it's probably a chemical mistake. Others said these things are unrelated. And the only way I can possibly look at it, as I said last year with the same slide, it's a unified phenomenon. We must see the whole picture. One of the problems I have with so many theorists, I think Ed Storms has that problem with him too, he's an experimentalist. He's a scientist, I consider myself an engineer and a businessman and a writer at this point, is that they take pieces of the evidence and they don't include the rest. Okay? That doesn't work in science. If you don't see all the evidence and try to account for it, you're fooling yourself. The biggest lesson of cold fusion, however, is this one. The very biggest. And it's an amazing discovery, really, profound discovery, that most scientists don't believe this. This is Science 101 to me, but most scientists do not believe this. They think that you can use theory to reject experimental evidence. They may bow to the fact that, oh, of course, experiments can change our theoretical outlook, but they really don't believe that. Most of them don't. And they also believe that when anything new comes along, if it's too far out, if it's too extraordinary, you need extraordinary proof. No, you need proof. Not extraordinary proof, just proof. The proof for cold fusion now is so immense that in almost any other area of physics or biology or chemistry, it would be accepted if it had not become so controversial thanks to the opponents. I do think the story is much bigger than just the cold fusion energy. I think what Tom Bearden is saying, and the Correas, and many other people, and Hal Puthoff, it's very tied to, must be some connection here, in my opinion. Also, the heavy element transmutation, which is now almost taken over the cold fusion field. It's almost become a field of alchemy. Low energy nuclear reactions, they're so commonly being seen now. The paradigm of the impossibility of breaking down the Coulomb barrier is collapsing very big time. And it may be that the conditions required to do these alchemy experiments, which is what you'd have to call them, they're low energy nuclear reactions, changing the identity of atoms, it may be much more prevalent than we think. And they may not be all that difficult to achieve. We're seeing that more and more. Certainly the Patterson cell shows that. I think I showed some of this last year. There is a hierarchy of heresies here. And I have now evolved 1 year later since last year, and I now believe more of this chart. This, I believe, is true. There are nuclear products. I believe for a long time that by our own tests, that the hydrosonic pump and cavitation devices could produce more energy out than in. There's more evidence of that building up. We have an experimental device that we're going to be receiving in our laboratory. We hope, we're promised this device. It's in the multi-kilowatt range. It's not Griggs, it's cavitation. If it's delivered and we test it and we see 200% or 600%, as it sometimes is said to reach, and it does have a patent, I prefer not to mention the name at this point because I just don't want to set off any bad vibrations. Watch for it in infinite energy. We'll test it if it arrives. This here, this is solid as can be. Low-level production, absolutely. We have helium-4 being produced, helium-3, and many other things now. Can these be remediated? It seems certain. We're going to have the American Nuclear Society meeting in Orlando June 1st through the 5th. On June 4th, Clean Energy Technologies will be talking about this. They'll be talking about how they were able to reduce radiation from a cell, an electrolytic cell. And there is a group in Ohio that can do it too. Okay? So it's no error, in my opinion. This is going to be very solid, and I'm getting very, very, very happy with this idea that commercial level isotope production will become a reality. So don't play around with the palladium market or anything else. I think that's dangerous. Are these over-unity permanent magnet motors and self-sustaining electric generators real? Last year I crossed the bridge when I investigated, and Mike Carroll in our magazine investigated the Correa device as much as we can. We don't see any way that device is not real. Okay? There's a very small chance, 0.1% or less, that it's a figment of their imagination. They've done some serious power measurement problem, but I doubt it. They're just too good. They're honest. They have impeccable integrity. There's no fraud here. I just wish that we had demonstration devices like that all over the planet. Well, what's going to be the upshot of all of this? The world's going to end. The world as we know it will end. Just as simple as that, just as the world ended, the world we knew prior to the personal computer ended. It's not here anymore. The world before aviation ended. The world before spaceflight ended. And now the world of killing ourselves and killing everybody else in the process to just survive with energy is going to end. We're going to have infinite energy. It will be zero. The recurring costs are going to approach zero, just like the cost of information today is going to virtually zero with the internet and so forth. Fossil fuel is going to end, oil cartels will be destroyed, homes and businesses will go off grid, most types of air pollution will vanish, nuclear waste will be remediated, nuclear power is dead, or will be dead. Transportation costs, as far as the fuel costs, not the wear and tear, will be very cheap, so people will travel much more. Maybe we'll have a more unified planet. certainly space travel will be enhanced. Other sciences are going to be affected, most particularly chemistry and physics, but also geology, astrophysics, biology, medicine, archaeology, and paleontology. What are these people going to say when it turns out that you can't strictly rely on the clocks that are being used today, the radioactive clocks? I mean, we can't say for sure that carbon dating will be wrong, but it's going to start putting things on a very shaky ground. And then maybe some of these anomalies that are being seen in paleontology, like people living with spears 400,000 years ago, which, you know, it's in Nature magazine now, maybe that will have some new interpretation. I don't know. But I just offer out the possibility. I hope that the scientific establishment does come under attack, because it certainly deserves it. It's been blocking all this new information in an outrageous manner. I hope that there will be pressures for other things, such as this organization and the ANS investigates, will be opened up. There'll be unbelievable changes happening. Now, there are some there was a man whom I hold dearly, Freeman Dyson. I wish he could come onto our cause. I think he's a bit afraid. It takes some real guts these days to stand up for cold fusion, because if you stand up for cold fusion and you're in the mainstream, such as Dyson is, he's a imaginative man, you will be called a nut. And he doesn't want to be called a nut. He's a very good man. He's written many good books. But ironically, just before the cold fusion announcement, he said this, and it was prophetic. There's no reason why a new technology has to develop like fission and hot fusion on 30-year timescales. All you need is to make it go fast, small units, simple design, mass production in a big market, and that's exactly what cold fusion and new energy is going to be, particularly cold fusion. These are the necessary ingredients. Okay? Real technological opportunities, they're there. There's no doubt about it now. This meeting reveals it. Cold fusion meetings reveal it. Dedicated researchers and developers, we have numerous such people, and a growing body of them reading magazines and newsletters and so forth, and a marketplace, a fertile marketplace. There's a gigantic multi-trillion-dollar marketplace. But there is I see Joseph wants to hear the new ingredient that I think is required. It's a new element that we've discovered that is very critical. It's called catalytic money. And, well, catalytic money has come in, but the kind of catalytic money we're talking about is large money in millions. We need millions of dollars in the field. I'm not talking about into Infinite Energy magazine. We can survive on a lot less than that. But we want a fund of money for the whole field. This is the problem with the field. There's no catalytic money, or there's little bits of it coming in here and there. We want gigantic resources brought to bear to catalyze the whole thing, and we must ignite a raging fire. That's what we want to do, is we want to start a fire. And I feel that the fire metaphor may be carried too far here, but yes, my book, Fire from Ice, was about fire, because this is like the discovery of fire. That's what cold fusion is. It's like discovering fire, because it's omnipresent. It's a universal thing that comes from not the air this time, and not trees, but from water. Okay? Everyone can have fire, everyone can have water, and so everyone can have energy. That's it. And the other C that we're talking about, of course, is the C of infinite energy in space, the zero-point energy, or whatever this is that's causing the Korea technology to work. Mike, just a little diversion here, Mike Carroll, who's an ex-RCA engineer, worked on vacuum tubes and television and everything else, he investigated as best he could from the Korea patents and discussions with the Korea, and finds their process to be fairly well unassailable. So, what are we going to do about this catalytic money? Well, some very good things are happening. In the 9th issue of our magazine, the one with Dr. Miley on it, this one, okay, we suggested the idea of a Superpower Incorporated idea, a venture capital fund for cold fusion and new energy. Well, it looks as though all our discussions with many, many potential investors and lawyers, big law firms, and people with business connections, as well as the ability to set up these types of funds. It's coming to fruition. It seems that in the next several months, I hope by the end of the summer, something like Superpower Inc. will be a reality for private investors, initially, large investors, qualified investors, for sharing the risk among all these different technologies. It will be privately held initially, but there's a demand, an unbelievable demand for smaller investors, and once the thing goes public, there'll be plenty of opportunity for everybody. And you guys will be the first to know of what's happening. The critical thing in doing a fund like this is information. That's the key thing. You have to identify, you have to have an early warning system, which I would say our magazine and our whole effort is, to find out in advance what's going on, to validate these things. There are many claims out there, many shocking, astonishing claims, but not all of them are real. Some of them might be real, but they're masquerading, I would hate to say this, as something that looks quite different than reality. It looks quite much like hanky-panky, frankly. And until a claim is seen and tested in someone else's laboratory, it cannot be accepted. Certainly no one in their right mind should invest in it. So we have to verify and quantify. Absolutely essential. So we have this is how we work today, okay? We are Mallove, Rothwell, and Tinsley. We publish this magazine. We are a corporation now in New Hampshire, by the way. We acquire information, and we see all these things here. We verify, validate, evaluate them, and introduce to the fund that we hope will be set up some of these things. We promote the field, and we're going to spin off something soon, we hope, that will market demonstration units, because that's the other missing ingredient. Demonstration units. In fact, that's almost more important than money at this point. And of course, we would like a little equity. Maybe it'll be about a thousandth of it, but if that's $1 trillion, we'll live with that. Okay. And we'd like to get paid for our efforts, too. We do get paid now, thanks to some very imaginative and generous people, but we are not sailing we're not home free yet, believe me. This is absolutely critical. And if you think about it, this is the whole problem with this entire energy field. You can't give anyone or sell them anything that is indisputably over unity. Now, I unfortunately did not see the testing of that Minkota motor last night that Joe Newman says was stolen from him, that is the technology. If that is over unity and it's being sold in Walmart, hell, we'll buy 100 of them and sell them ourselves. Okay, that'll be it. But I'd like to know the results of those tests. I have a feeling that it may not be over unity, but let's hold off judgment. Maybe it is being sold as an over unity device and we don't even know about it. Okay. We are working at the moment with a Raglan cell. Evan Raglan, the man who invented the daisy wheel printer, and it is in the Smithsonian, that is, the daisy wheel printer is, his invention, has invented a version of the Pons and Fleischmann cell that he claims is much better. It has 2 anodes and a cathode, so it's got 3 electrodes, and there are 2 different potentials kept between the 2 anodes and the cathode. All right, cathode is palladium, specially prepared by him. We purchased 2 of his cells, prototype cells. They are now under test. I started doing one in my lab in Bow, but I got bogged down with a magazine. Chris Tinsley began his cell in England, and he has more time to devote to it since he isn't bogged down with accounting and magazines and everything. So he's starting off on both of those now. And we don't have any results to report yet. I will tell you the initial phase of loading and so forth showed no excess heat so far, but we don't necessarily expect to see it. If we don't see it, it doesn't mean the Raglan cell is wrong. It means that perhaps this condition did not work out. On the other hand, it may be that Raglan himself is somewhat deluded about this system. But others have checked it out, and in past runs it has worked. There's a group in Michigan that we influenced, and they are going gung-ho, gangbusters, to build a 2,000-watt version of this. They've tested it out on a small scale, and they feel that it works. What we want to do with the Raglan cell is we want to sell the darn thing. In fact, I went down to a trade show, and I got some preliminary estimates as to what it will cost to manufacture this, even before we know it's real. Now, if it is real, believe me, and if it's robust, we're going to be able to sell it. No one is selling cold fusion cells today. They are renting them and not even claiming the excess heat. Clean Energy Technologies is. We want to sell them. We think that's the only thing that will change everything. Here are some of the opportunities, and I hope I'm not overlooking anyone here. There are hundreds of opportunities. And by the way, Zenergy Corporation, which I do want to refer to, sort of an allied group of doing a similar idea, and we welcome them to the field. They were here, in some sense, about the same time we started in all of this. They are looking at many things, too. Perhaps there will be ways that we can combine forces. We're not in the business of getting all the turf for ourselves. We have no interest in that. We have only the interest in promoting the field, because if we promote the field and the field is successful, we'll sell so many magazines we'll be able to retire at that point. All right? No. Seriously. Nothing is more important than the success of the field to everyone. So we are all in this together. Lab Effects of Canada, hydrocatalysis, which is now Blacklight, Clean Energy Technologies, Eneco, hydrodynamics. We don't know much about SciEx up to this point, the magnet people, NRG in Denver. And by the way, our magazine was the key catalytic ingredient for them getting a contract from Japan, which allowed them to pay for their ads. Okay. Morningstar, Ohio. DW Research, which you will hear about. We worked with DW Research. I urge you to hear David Wallman's talk. This looks like an over-unity process. It sounds strange, but a carbon arc underwater not only may be making nuclear reactions, but may be over-unity. The data are pointing strongly in that direction. I want to get it nailed down 100%, but to me it looks solid, and it would be totally reproducible. Mitch Schwartz's group with Jet Technology, Jet Energy Technology, of course Hal Fox's wonderful Fusion Information Center, and he has tabs on all sorts of things, such as Ken Scholer's work, and on and on and on. The opportunities are immense, but we need to figure out the priorities. How am I doing on time here? Okay, I have no idea. Okay. Just a little memory lane here. At one time, cold fusion, as Ed pointed out, was the biggest thing, and everyone was hoping, oh, this is it. The journalists were behind it, the politicians were behind it, the people of the United States and the world were behind it. It was the biggest thing since sliced bread. There it is on Time magazine on, this was May 8th, 1989. It's not a figment of our imagination. It really did happen, okay? And it was on Business Week, all on the same day. And then mysteriously it disappeared. Well, it went down slowly. There got to be all these outrageous big lies in motion, like you couldn't reproduce it. And the good laboratories got bad results. And there were no nuclear products. And there was no explanation, therefore you couldn't believe it. And just all kinds of garbage was stated about this. This will go down in history, I'm sure, as one of the greatest one of the greatest farces in history, okay? Huizenga of the Department of Energy stated that cold fusion is the scientific fiasco in the century. Well, in our latest magazine, we say he came to cause more trouble out in Cal Poly. We call him the Department of Energy's fiasco of the century. This may be the fiasco of the millennia, that the greatest discovery in history of new fire, basically, was for years sidetracked because of this nonsense. Well, now, fortunately, Hollywood is helping us a bit. Elizabeth Shue, Val Kilmer, maybe they'll donate some of their acting money to help our organization. I was very proud to be part of them. Part of the movie that is to help advise the movie. The script was excellent before we even got to it, before my hands even got to it, and I must say, they could not have written that script if they had not been influenced by what we were saying. Because if they had read Huizenga and Taubes and Close and the New York Times and all this other baloney, they wouldn't have even done the movie. But instead they realized, holy mackerel, there's something there. And there's more truth ironically, in this $65 million Hollywood movie than in the entire Department of Energy. That's a sad commentary, but it's true. Here's Val. And one of our subscribers happens to, he does theory on the side, but he also is, believe it or not, a movie, just a movie ticket taker. You know, he does cold fusion theory on the side. I won't mention his name. He's a very lovely man. But he sent me this. The Saint, cunning, devious, dangerous, treacherous. Yes, that's what we are, friends, cold fusion. Cunning, devious, dangerous, and treacherous. Okay. Yeah, while the nightmare of ignoring has been going on, all this work has been going on. Here was the Como conference in Italy in 1991, the only one I missed after I quit MIT. I did go to the Nagoya conference in Japan. It was a wonderful conference. 350 people were there. Of course, it was very easy for the Japanese to get there. And most recently, I was at, again, a Japanese conference in Hokkaido, a lovely area to visit, I must say. Lovely hotel on the crater of a volcano. Joseph Gruber was there, Dr. Gruber was there, many other fine friends were there. It was a wonderful conference. The Japanese are proceeding very nicely, but they are too conservative in our opinion, much too conservative. The New York Times did know it right, at least in 1992. They said that it's derided in the US, yes, that's correct, and it's big in Japan, and that is also correct. And they haven't covered it since then, haven't covered cold fusion. But here's an interesting thing that's coming up. Recently, Doctors Arata and Zhang, and you can read about we printed their abstracts of their paper in the current issue. Arata, by the way, is the hot fusion man in Japan. He started hot fusion in Japan. He's Mr. Tokamak. Now he's Mr. Cold Fusion, okay? And he's igniting Japan with this. We have evidence of this due to new subscriptions from Japan, among other things. But what he did is meticulous work over the years to absolutely prove that helium-4 is being generated, helium-3 is being generated. They've had runs that go 5,000 hours, and they put out, eventually, hundreds of millions of joules per cubic centimeter of material. That ain't chemistry. And in fact, it's so prominent that this entire issue of the High Temperature Society of Japan, 56 pages, all devoted to Dr. Arata's mind-boggling, irrefutable alchemy work, okay? However, this work was hand-carried to the New York Times, not by a disreputable character like myself, who wouldn't be believed by the New York Times, but by a representative, Dr. Kubiak, who went to William Broad of the New York Times and handed him this, and gave him the evidence that he could, if he were a decent journalist, he could do an immediate, wonderful story. He doesn't have to accept cold fusion, but he could do an immediate story on it. Do you know what he did instead? He said, we need somebody else to reproduce this work. Send it to Eugene Mallove, because I give him a free subscription to the magazine for some crazy reason, and Eugene Mallove will find someone to reproduce this. This is crazy. I mean, this shows how insane the journalists are in this country. But he has no problem, here it is, this was 93, I believe, breakthrough in nuclear fusion offers hope for power of the future. So whenever the hot fusion boys come out with some result, like they did with the tokamak at Princeton, he's right on the trigger, ready to report it. It's a scandal. Our old friend Jerry Bishop at the Wall Street Journal is now retired. I was wondering, why isn't Jerry Bishop writing about cold fusion anymore? Well, he's not there, okay? But he is there in a sense because he is a prominent member of the National Association of Science Writers. And I regret to say that even Jerry Bishop has been browbeaten into submitting to the silence of the lambs, as I call it. They have not had any cold fusion speakers at their annual meetings in 8 years. They've had no cold fusion speakers there. There's no excuse for this. They have a book that just came out, which we will be reviewing. This is the manual of the National Association of Science Writers. It's about 2,000 science writers in the United States and the world. And in that, 3 or 4 of the science writers say that cold fusion is nonsense. We're going to give it a good review next issue. Our good housekeeping stamp of approval. Yes, Jerry Bishop did Popular Science article, but where is Popular Science today? Are they following up the story? No, you know what journalists do these days? They do a quick hit and run. Okay, they get a little courage, a little bit of courage, a tiny bit of courage. They do a cover story. Then they run. They don't cover the story. They know what's going on, but they're not covering the story. They're covering it on everything else, fuel cells, ordinary hydrogen fuel cells, electric cars and everything. But cold fusion, they're afraid. Ed Storms got it into Technology Review. Mine was rejected in '91 by Herman Feschbach, but I'm glad that Ed got it in. It showed that cold fusion was coming out of the garbage can, you see? And there was indeed a storm of protest after this. Outrageous comments by MIT professors. How dare you report this story at all in your magazine? This has got to be one of the greatest studies in human misbehavior ever. Okay, so we've had this magazine just to show you what we've done. We've gone through the first year, now we've gone through the second year. And by the way, we have a very big theorist here with us at this meeting, Dr. Joseph McKibben. You'll be able to find him and track him down. There he is. And he has a theory that some of the earlier work on fractional charges in this century is real, and that may be the basis for explaining cold fusion and underwater carbon arcs and so forth. We've published him. He has the honor of being the man who pulled the switch on the Trinity test in 1945, July 16th. He pulled the switch, got in his truck, and went away from the bomb. He didn't want to get fried. But now he has the courage, of course he's retired from Los Alamos, to talk about cold fusion. If he were still there, they'd probably crucify him. All right. What should I do? Well, let's just memorialize our friend Huizenga. This is the man who did show up at Professor Bush's lab recently. He was invited to observe a cold... What? Put it up higher? Oh, flip it. Oh, yes. Huizenga looks bad whichever way you look at him. So, oh, John is an amazing man. He's actually very personable, but he's as Bush would say, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Yes, can you imagine the protocol of the chairman of your department, a physics department, suddenly telling you, by the way, there's a man who's coming to give a lecture that says all the work you're dealing with is utter nonsense. Okay? The head of the physics department at Cal Poly did not tell Professors Bush and Eagleton. They just said, oh, by the way, he's coming. And you can read the story in the latest issue of the magazine. When Huizenga was ushered into Bush's lab, he was invited to stay and take measurements. He said, oh, I don't have the time. I'm consulting at Livermore. But he did have time to give a lecture lambasting cold fusion. And he told Bush privately, he said, I'm not criticizing you. I'm just criticizing Pons and Fleischmann and others. Again, sheep and wolf. And he does have this amazing book, which I find I'm very glad this book and others like it have been published, because it's only through these negative books that we get the statements from the original people who stated that they were not objective. Okay, they knew that it was wrong in the beginning, and they joined the panel anyway. Professor Happer at Princeton said, in Gary Taubes' book, said, I knew just by looking at Pons and Fleischmann on television that they were incompetent boobs. Now, if you had one of the jurors on the Simpson trial that was found to have said, just by looking at Simpson, I knew for sure he was innocent, okay? If that came out, the whole trial would be a complete mistrial, right? Okay, retroactively. But on the other hand, that did not happen, and we're faced with that. There was Parker of MIT, $200,000 a year man, who lied to the press about what he said about Pons and Fleischmann. He used the F word. He was the first to use the F word. It became, after May 1st, 1989, it became acceptable in physics to call Pons and Fleischmann frauds. But he was afraid of being sued, so he had me write a press release stating that he did not say those things, even though those things are right on the tape. They held a party for the end of cold fusion, a wake for cold fusion. They hadn't even analyzed their data. I know some of you have heard this before, but we have to repeat it. It's so amazing that this happened. They could have a party for the end of cold fusion, black armbands optional, brought to you by the Center for Contrived Fantasies, etc. And then, later on that summer, they got around to analyzing their calorimetry data, and this is what they published, which I think all of you would say shows that the light water control cell looks just like the heavy water control cell. That's what they published in their peer-reviewed journal, with the editor being employed by Parker. But the real data was this data, which shows that there was excess heat, or at the very least, that they should have done the experiment again. So I would have to classify this as a major instance of the abuse of scientific ethics. Peter Hagelstein was almost not given tenure, but he made it to the big time. You see, the equations that Peter talks about were sliced up by me on pieces of paper, and they're now in the Paramount Pictures film, and Elizabeth Shue takes them to heart, so to speak. For those of you who have seen the movie. John Bockris is a hero at Texas A&M, major alchemist, major proponent of low-energy nuclear reactions. He's held a number of conferences there, which we've covered. And in return for this, they attempted to get rid of him twice. And both times they succeeded. He's going to be retiring in June, but still they're going after him in every which way. One thing happened to him. He received a bag of horse manure in his mailbox, which we believe comes from one of the major professors that are against him. And there was a note attached that said, "Since you're into BS, here's more of it." And another instance, a professor accosted, should I say, people going into his meeting and got very violent and angry, encouraging them not to go into the meeting. Okay? It's almost as like if you go in there, you'll be consorting with the devil or something. It's unbelievable what's happened. I would never have, if someone had predicted this story years ago and said, this is what's going to happen, I would say, this is impossible. I was very naive. I thought in 1991 that what happens in science is that you publish some excellent data, like this Arata work, right? Excellent data in peer-reviewed journals all over the world. Not as much, but at least some of it. Physics Letters A, Fusion Technology, Japanese Academy of Sciences, etc., etc. Then people will accept it. But no, that's not the way it works. The goalposts keep getting changed, and I swear, even after a product comes out now, they will be saying, it can't be true because the performance isn't good enough. Well, let me just summarize some of the things going on right now. 5 minutes or so? Oh, okay. I'm beyond time at this point. There are many things going on. It does make the head spin, and I sometimes wonder how I can possibly do it. You know, we juggle a lot of things. I was called a juggler this morning, and I guess that is a description. I juggle maybe too many things, but we see everything that's going on, or as much as we can, and I'm sure others. I had excellent talks with Zenergy Corporation, people who'll be talking later, and they tell me of other things that shock me that I didn't know about. I'm sure we're both looking into gigantic realms that are about to open up, and it really makes the mind spin. This was the PowerGen demonstration of the clean energy technology cell, PowerGen in Anaheim, in a hotel room, unfortunately. But my colleague Jed Rothwell, who's a very strict man as far as being sure of something, he was very sure that he saw 1,300 watts coming out of this by direct measurement. Only 1.5 watts of electrolytic power were going in. They had to change the controls on the air conditioning system. They were frozen in order to get the room to cool off. Of course, the skeptics always have an explanation for it. They said this pump, the circulator pump, which is an aquarium pump. We love cold fusion because you can buy things in Kmart to do your experiments. That's the way science should be. Martin Fleischmann recently said, don't do any experiment you can't do in a test tube. They said, oh, this pump here, which who knows what it was, 50 watts, 30 watts, whatever it is. He said, oh, that must be causing the heat. Right. Next time, buy an aquarium pump and try to heat a hotel room with it by turning it on and having it circulate water. These people who criticize cold fusion don't have the slightest idea of orders of magnitude. They have, quite frankly, left taken leave of their senses. Here's something that Dr. Cravens showed. This was the Motorola test. Motorola is interested in this. This was a Patterson cell putting out 20 watts. Okay, they turned the input power off. The delta T persisted over at least 11 hours straight. Here's input temperature, output temperature of the flowing coolant over the Patterson beads. And they turned the power off, and it's off. And I asked Dennis, how long does this last? He says, oh, it has a half-life of about 3 days. So here it is, friends. All my students, when I taught high school to survive, and more recently college, it's interesting teaching college students about physics, or what's left of physics. They understand this. The physicists at MIT do not understand simple things like this. You have a box of something unknown, and you may initially put some power into it, and it gets hot so that water flowing through at temperature 1 is less than this by, say, 15 degrees. And we all know what the specific heat of water is, and the flow rate going through at 20 milliliters per minute shows that this is about 20 watts being put out. And we tell them, oh yes, and this company, Motorola, turned the power off. And it went on for days. And you know that you don't have a free 20-watt heater going on for days unless there's something special. And there were no changes in the water. So that's it. That's the end of the story right there. But the physicists don't understand that because they don't know Science 101. They want, give us the explanation, then we'll believe it. That's what they want. They're really not scientists. They have all sorts of credentials, but they're not scientists. I think that's about all I want to say. Let me give you some updates as to what's going on now. Okay, we have 2 groups in the United States that can electrolytically remediate nuclear waste. We have an article in our present issue, and I have some free copies here. You can take this just 50 copies. A lot of you are subscribers anyway, so don't take it if you're a subscriber. That article talks about this remediation. On June 4th, at the American Nuclear Society meeting in Orlando, there will be a major discussion with Bockris and Patterson and Miley and Hora, and they'll all be there talking about alchemy and cold fusion, okay? If any of you can be there, I know there's a steep registration fee. You should try to be there. I'm sure they will be attacked by skeptics, but at least it will be public. They may conduct a demonstration. They could do it. They are thinking of it. The patent has been approved. The number has not been assigned, but there is now last-minute hanky-panky, I understand, and one of the ways of dealing with hanky-panky is to, at the patent office that is to conduct a public demonstration. Another thing that I believe they're doing, and I only hear this by rumor, but fairly good substantiated rumor, they have, that's how things are in this field, they have a process now that does not rely on beads, that is in continuous operation, producing several hundred watts of excess power for months, totally reliably. They have another process that I believe, according to Dr. Cravens, has a very intense blue glow coming out of it. They are not Patterson beads. I have not seen this. I'm just transmitting the words to you of what Dr. Cravens told me. I don't think he is a fabricator, or maybe he could be exaggerating. I think Cravens will be the first to drive a car across the United States because he's got himself a nice little 1,000-watt steam engine there, and he's ready to hook up one of these more advanced processes to the steam input and size it up and see if he can get a little car to go across the country. I hope he does, because that would be a major coup. There are journalists, there are several good journalists in the United States who are ready to go on this entire story. Ira Flato, National Public Radio, Dr. Michael Gillen of ABC Television, who did a Nightline and a Good Morning America on the same day in '96. Otis Port of Business Week. Otis Port would be writing about cold fusion all the time. It's just that his editors won't allow him to. They want to see a product. Okay, we'll give him a product. If Otis Port gets to see a product, then cold fusion gets into Business Week again. And this is very important. You see, money talks. That's what's so important about Superpower Inc. or Zenergy. When we get money, there's a visible, tangible evidence by people that big things are happening. And how could I forget? I'm sorry. I did not talk about Dr. Mills. Dr. Randall Mills, I didn't have time to make a slide, of Blacklight Power. It used to be called Hydrocatalysis Power Corporation. He has an exotic theory. Forget the theory for a minute. They are no longer using electrolytic cells. They are doing very high temperature work in the gas phase, supposedly by catalytically shrinking hydrogen. They get hundreds to thousands of times more energy out of hydrogen than could be explained by chemical combustion. But they do not have this in a practical device that can generate electricity. But they're talking to all kinds of large companies, some of which are beginning to invest in them. They have an enormous website, a wonderful website, called http://blacklightpower.com. It's an amazing story. That's their demonstration in cyberspace. I think Blacklight is one of the most advanced companies. They've managed, by the way, to persuade a former Department of Energy official, Shelby Brewer, to come aboard as an advisor. So I think big things are happening with them. At this point, let me see if there's anything else. Blacklight, Clean Energy Technologies, the Raglan cell. I don't really put that in league, but it's our little attempt to get a demonstration unit. Bush may have something. The cavitation device that we're about to get may be another thing. And I have my big blue ones completely open about all these electromagnetic machines, whether it's the one you can buy in Walmart or the strange device that we heard about in Canada, not Korea, but another one. And I'm just very open-minded about it. So at this point, what I would like to do is maybe just stop and open it up for questions. But the bottom line I just want to leave you with, for all practical purposes, we have won the cold fusion war. There are enough people on the planet who are going to carry this forward. It doesn't matter who they kill or marginalize. Somebody is going to commercialize this. The genie's out of the bottle. There's no stopping it. And that's it. We won the war. Okay? So any questions?